As North Carolina leaves the ACC, Miami surely plans to do the same. The problem? The Big Ten and the SEC don't want them. That's where the Big 12 steps in. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. Why does no one want Miami? TJ Pittenger of College Football Addiction will join. We'll have that conversation and how the Big 12 is squarely in the hunt as things rearrange. Then, why are they rearranging? Well, North Carolina plans to leave the ACC for the SEC. Multiple sources have now reported. With that, Florida State and Clemson will do the same before the 2031 date that we originally planned on. And we'll finish it off with West Virginia. They're rooting for an ACC collapse more than anyone. They want Virginia Tech. They want Pitt in the Big 12. Give them the regional rivals they deserve. If you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job. Why am I delaying? TJ, let's do it.
Man, there's some concern, I feel like, within a certain fan base, and I want to get your take. I want us to talk about it a little bit. Is Miami the Will Smith gift right now where he's looking around and there's no furniture, there's no family? What about me? Why does nobody want me? Is Miami in some kind of danger right now? Is there fear? Is it real concern? What are the thoughts with Miami and conference realignment?
Yeah, the Realignment Insider inside the Big 12 on X has been very confident that Miami will be left off the board when the Big Ten and the SEC decide to go hunting in realignment and expansion. Now, TJ, this all starts with North Carolina. And the news this last week that North Carolina is actively exploring an out from the ACC, likely to go to the SEC. That's exactly what they want. And I don't think Miami has that liberty to go to the SEC. And the further we get, the less I'm sure they have the liberty to go to the Big Ten. Now, we've heard that the Big Ten and the SEC likely want to stop at 20. That's kind of the magic number. For the Big Ten, they'll leave a slot open for Notre Dame. So really, they want 3 new schools in this whole shakeup. And for that conference, those 3 schools could very well be a Virginia or a Duke, maybe build a basketball powerhouse, and maybe they go get the Clemson or Florida State. And for the SEC, we've heard North Carolina. They may stop at 18, actually. North Carolina being in the fold for them, and I'm sure that will extend to a Florida State or a Clemson as well. And what you boil it down to is, as you kind of go down these brands, and remember, North Carolina, Virginia, really good academic institutions, and the Big Ten looks at that, and the SEC looking at regionality. I'm looking at the SEC. I'm hearing from sources that the market overlap and redundancy is a reason they wouldn't want Miami. They already have the Florida Gators. They would be attractive by Florida State. That's going to be a match that I think the two could consider, the SEC and Florida State. The Gameday Experience is not one the SEC is impressed with. Inconsistent on-field performance the last 2 decades. Miami was super rich in championships 20 years ago, but is that kind of waned? The SEC doesn't look at it as a viable option to join their conference and boost the league in football. For the Big Ten, you're looking at the academic profile. The whole deal is the AAU membership. Miami recently gained that, but they don't have a long-standing tradition of academic prowess, and for some reason, the Big Ten is still valuing that. The competition for the Florida market. The Big Ten, if they were to go with Florida State, I don't think they want to bring Miami in there right after them to compete against one another in that conference. And you look at brand value, I just don't know if the Big Ten is completely on board with what Miami gives you. Who is then? That's the Big 12. So as we look at, and we already had a conversation last week with North Carolina out of the fold of the ACC, Clemson, Florida State, Miami likely want to follow suit. I'm sure Louisville and Pitt and folks will explore between now and 2035 trying to get out of the ACC. When that day comes, the closer we get, I fear everything's pointing toward Miami being left off the table by the Power 2 and the Power 3, including the Big 12 and a Big 12 that has Miami within it.
Yeah, so I don't think anything's impossible. I will tell you, the folks that I speak with at Miami who are somewhat connected, I don't want to say that they're, in the meetings of the trustees and things like that, right? Like they can happen behind closed doors because they're a private university. There is a lot of confidence on Miami's side. Just me talking, we haven't even talked about this off air, that they will land in the Big Ten. right? And maybe that's false confidence. Maybe it's not. Listen, I can put all the rivalry aside. I can put all the hatred aside. Would I like Miami to get left behind? Absolutely. Just as a fan of Florida State, sure. I think it'd be hilarious. I have a hard time when the rubber really meets the road. Now, I agree with all the things on the SEC. I don't think they're a fit for the SEC. I think the SEC would far and away take Florida State before they took Miami. And I think Florida State, for different reasons, fits in kind of both categories, and maybe even has a leg up on them in both against both conferences. Really, even all three. Like, I think the Big 12 would take Florida State if that was possible over Miami. So listen, I'll put all the bias aside though. When the rubber really meets the road, I don't know that I could see them taking Virginia over a Miami. Like, I think in theory it sounds good. Oh, well, this and that, more regionality. If Florida State, especially if Florida State was to go to the SEC, then I think the Big Ten would really want to pounce on that Florida market. And they fit the mold of a Big Ten school, private, smaller. They kind of make sense in some regards there. But I just have a hard time, even with all my biases and maybe what I would want, I have a hard time the rubber really meeting the road and Miami not being in. I think their next couple of years of performance could also impact that. We've talked about the inconsistency, and any Miami fan will tell you how inconsistent they've really been over the last 2 decades. I do think that if they can stack a few more seasons and really show that they can compete, a lot of people forget that Miami's season ended poorly last year in the bowl game and then in November. But I mean, they were a lock for the playoff at one point. I mean, they were number 7 in the country and had trips to Georgia Tech and Syracuse on the schedule. Like, nobody thought that they were going to drop a game at Syracuse and also lose to Georgia Tech and then lose their bowl game. They were the team behind Alabama when SMU snuck in because of the Clemson win in the championship. So they were right there on the doorstep. I think if they can continue that, because I do think Miami is a national brand, right? For some reason, I think they're a bigger national brand than they are a regional or local brand, just because I don't think people in Miami really care. Small fan base, but because of what they did in the 80s and 90s, similar to Notre Dame, they are a national brand. And so I think when the rubber meets the road, I know that different people talk to different folks. I think Miami will land in the Big Ten. That seems like what's most likely. But if for whatever reason they're not there, I think they either stay in the ACC or go to the Big 12. I can't see the SEC as being a possibility, but I don't know. I'm not willing to move off them probably landing in the Big Ten if I had to call it now.
So let me ask you this. If you're the SEC, you already have Florida, so you think, okay, let's not battle the Gators with adding Florida State and having some interstate rivalry or crossover. If you're the SEC, and that's Greg Sankey's mentality, which we know his vetting process is tighter than any other conference. He doesn't want to add anybody. Florida State's not everybody and anybody, but the Big Ten might be a nicer landing spot for Florida State right now. If that's the case, would there be any value for the Big Ten to say, okay, we also want Miami with Florida State? Because I could only see that going wrong for the Tony Petitti in that conference.
I don't know. You look at, even the SEC, how many states are there where they're doubled up? And Tennessee's one, Alabama's one, Texas is one.
Tennessee's kind of one.
Yeah. It's still there.
A little bit, yes.
Mississippi is one. So you've got at least
Texas,
4,
Texas,
right?
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, not LSU, sorry. Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Tennessee, kind of, right? You've got 4 already. Right. So, and then if they were to go get a Clemson, which I think fits better in the SEC than in the Big Ten, not that they couldn't land in the Big Ten, but they need at 5. So I don't know. I think there's this narrative out there of like, oh man, they would never want to add another program from a state they're already in. And it's like, why would you say that? There's 4 or 5 of them already. And then it's kind of the same thing with the Big Ten, isn't it? You think about where you think about Indiana has a couple, you think about Michigan has a couple, you think about California now has a couple. So I don't know that it would be the worst thing. I don't think it would compete. I think they would want to, I think from the Big Ten's perspective, what are the pros for Miami? If they can continue to be relevant in football, obviously that's the biggest pro, right? Bring in eyeballs. The large metropolis that is the geographic location of Miami, I think is very attractive to away fans, right? We all know the jokes about Miami. Oh, they don't pack out the stadium unless it's a big game. Well, they're going to pack out that stadium when Notre Dame comes to town this week, right? And imagine if you were putting matchups like Miami, Michigan, or Miami, Ohio State, or Miami, Nebraska, or Miami, Florida State. Would you want to continue to capitalize on that rivalry? Because Florida State, Florida, and Miami end up in 3 different conferences. One of those rivalries is dying. Either Florida State's with Miami or Florida State's with Florida. So if you're, I guess my thought for the Big Ten is we could capitalize on Miami being good at football, right? Which they haven't shown that they've been able to do consistently, right? So we're a little early on just saying that is a for sure thing. The rivalry with Florida State, the metropolis that is Miami, you are getting an AAU accredited member, even though they are new into that, but you are kind of staying within your vein there. So I think there are some pros, right? Do they outweigh the cons of Miami's inconsistency or double dipping in Florida, going after other markets? Possibly. But we talked about this, what does USC matter to LA compared to Miami versus the Canes, right? Well, they're 3rd or 4th, right? After the Lakers and the Dodgers and, the Dolphins and everything else that they've got going on down there. Messy at this point. Yeah. So I do think that there are some similarities there. I think that you could maybe make some of the same arguments you made for USC with Miami of have their better days passed. Yeah, maybe. But I think there are pros for the Big Ten to go after it. And I don't think double dipping in the state would really impact either conference. It's, looking at Florida State to the SEC or Miami to the Big Ten, if that's where Florida State landed.
Yeah, the hope is for the Big 12 that those cons for the Big 10 and the SEC outweigh the pros, that ultimately Miami is left off of their table. And I do think if the Big 12 is spearheaded by a successful BYU and Texas Tech and Miami and Louisville, that they're still in the conversation for consistent college football playoff spots and big brands. Today's show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Look, college football season is coming up. And there's one thing I know, living on the East Coast is almost impossible because games start at like midnight over here. And so I'd take a 5 Hour Energy transfusion. Brings back the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. The wildest shot I've ever made in golf was a 7-foot putt. But that was fun and I liked it a lot. And it was a day that I drink 5 Hour Energy frequently, actually, when I golf, especially. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that number is 5hourenergy.com, number 5. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. The offer is only valid until September 30th. On one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders, whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36. Get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order the transfusion-flavored 5 Hour Energy shots and do it today with 5 Hour Energy.
North Carolina, the exit that seems to be coming from them, right? Don't have a timeline. Don't know exactly when that is. It feels like it's going to be before that 2030 deadline. Not predicting, not saying it's definite, but it feels like it's coming sooner rather than later. Drinks, does that make it more likely? I was actually asked this on a show this week too. Does that make it more or less likely that Florida State and Clemson also leave before that deadline? That timeline,
I think it makes it more likely that Florida State and Clemson will follow suit with North Carolina. They need somebody to spearhead this. What I remember about January of 2023, maybe it was 2024, but I believe 2023, somewhere in that range. When we first heard tell of Florida State and Clemson wanting to get out of the ACC, it was a bombshell, and you thought, wow, $500 million is a lot, but they seem very serious about this. They're going to go to court with it, and if they're able to, they'll exit as early as possible. Reason being, they could make $15, $20 million more dollars per year in the SEC and the Big Ten, and those contracts are built for inflation, so they're more advantageous for the school long term. Come to find out, they were serious, both of those schools, about leaving the conference to the point where they've now reworked their grant of rights and reworked their ability to get out of the conference in a few years. But there was still a bit of either financial savvy or even cowardice to say we're going to do it right now. They decided to hold off, and they'll likely hold off until it drops to $75 million instead of that original $500 million that comes in 2030. But then North Carolina says, hey, for $100 million, for $125 million, we'll leave early. we've got the Jordan brand, and if we're already making 15 or 20 million more on a full share of revenue in the Big Ten or the SEC, why wouldn't we go do that? It seems to be the way that North Carolina is talking right now, and they were fourth or fifth down the line when these conversations started happening. It was Clemson and then Florida State, and then where will Miami go? Today, North Carolina has replaced those three as this stalwart of the ACC that wants to spearhead realignment. And I think the ultimate demise of that conference, we've talked about it, 2035 is probably the real year that the ACC falls apart. But their ultimate demise lies in a school not named Florida State or Clemson taking the onus upon themselves to get out. Now that there's a little man or an underdog or an unexpected player in this that wants to lead the way, I would be really surprised if Florida State and Clemson said, yeah, North Carolina can do its own thing, we're just going to sit back and wait. I think they're the ones so passionate about a new move, they would follow suit.
Is it crazy? Here's my take, and I don't know if you agree with this or not. I think the ESPN wants to get some Belichick versus SEC matchups sooner rather than later. If North Carolina waits until 2030, like he's not there anymore. Like he's not coaching until 2030. I'll be shocked. I'll just say it like that. I think ESPN, my take has always been that the TV networks are really who's driving this boat. Now, does Florida State and Clemson want to get out? Absolutely. Would it matter if ESPN and Fox weren't the ones like puppeteering the whole situation, right? So my take is, yes, UNC definitely wants to get out, but I can want to live in a mansion for all that I want. If I don't have somebody ready to build or buy me a mansion, it doesn't really matter how much I want it. My take is that ESPN very much wants some of these Belichick versus Kirby, Belichick versus Lane, Belichick versus Sark, Belichick versus just whoever, right? Like there's a list of characters in the SEC that'd be a lot of fun to see. I think they know they're going to get a Belichick bump, much like Fox and somewhat ESPN did when Dion went out to Colorado. And my take is that ESPN will probably help them make this happen, whether it's them helping with the buyout, whether it's them helping with, negotiating things with the ACC, whatever the situation is. That's why I think UNC will get out before 2030, if I had to guess, because I think they want to take advantage. Once Belichick leaves, even if it's the son that takes over, there will not be the same bump, right? Even if North Carolina is a perennially good team, which I don't necessarily think they'll be, not to crap on North Carolina and get their fans all upset, but I don't think they're going to just all of a sudden go to the SEC and turn into a 10-11 win team year after year after year after year. It's hard for the SEC powers to do that. So I don't think, North Carolina's ratings will drop. I think ESPN knows they got to strike while the iron's hot. And that's why I ultimately think they will help them get out faster.
The iron's not hot for very long. You already mentioned that. Bill Belichick probably gone by 2030. That seems reasonable. So if ESPN's going to move on this, wouldn't they move far quicker than that 2030, 2031 original timeline?
Sure.
I like it. and I like it because, so you're a Florida State guy, right? And I'm sure you would rather see Florida State in the SEC or the Big Ten than the ACC. That's like saying, would you rather go to Yale or go to Samford, right? If you're a scholar, there's a very easy answer on that one. So I understand that that's not a knock on the ACC necessarily or its detriment. You would just rather go to the big dog. To me, TJ, again, if North Carolina does this, I just don't see a world where if ESPN says, hey, you're our big dog because of Bill Belichick, I don't see a world where Clemson and Florida State don't say, hey, aren't we also your big dog? And ESPN says, well, yeah, we'll help you out. I don't think you can just hand select only North Carolina, because the second you slap Florida State or Clemson in the face, now they're more ready to go to the Big Ten, which is facilitated by Fox. And of course, ESPN would want those two schools under the ESPN umbrella. I think that's why this whole thing could happen earlier. And as much as I don't want to prey on the demise of the ACC, ultimately it is going to help the Big 12 because of the Louisvilles and the NC States and the Pitts.
Doesn't bother me to prey on their demise. I agree. I think you'd get into some collusion type stuff. If they were offering something to one, sure, you'd have to offer something to
But what is tampering? What is collusion? Right. Is it all?
It's only allowed in the SEC, though. So that's why I think they'd be fine with ESPN doing it. I do think that, it would speed things up. I have a hard time seeing like just a North Carolina moving. like in 2027, right? I have a hard time seeing just one team, just like I really would have a hard time, even though I don't really care about any of the other teams personally, I would have a hard time just seeing FSU going in like 2027, whether it was the SEC or the Big Ten. I would think there would be a group. Now, is that a group of 2? Is that a group of 3? Is that a group of 4? I don't think it's a group of like 8 year one. I think that it takes time for some of these other programs to come up with the money and for there to be spots. And like, I don't think there's a North Carolina announces they're leaving and then 7 other teams announce that day. Even you mentioned like the Louisvilles and the other teams that the Big 12 may try to poach. I think there's some years that go along with that. I think the price tag in 2027 is what 18 times 3 is 36 plus the 75, 111 million. Like, I don't know that Louisville can afford, that 9 digits up front to be able to do that. And then anyone else too, right? Like you're going down the pecking order of like, well, who would be next? Pitt, Boston, not Boston College, Virginia Tech. Like, are we really going to come up with $300 million from the Big 12 to be able to get those teams in 2027? So I think that they may move, but it'll probably be a couple of years down the road, maybe closer to that 2030 timeline. Maybe ESPN is able to shift some things around and help some of these teams negotiate and get numbers down even further. But I think I'm in full agreement. I think that North Carolina moved. Florida State, and I do think Florida State fans and Clemson fans are even kind of looking at North Carolina like, hey man, where were you the last 2 years? Like, where were you when we took all the daggers, when we were taking all this, the arrows for doing this? Where were you when we were laying it on the line to get you this pathway? So I do think there's some hypocrisy and Florida State fans and Clemson. But all that said, whoever can get out first, that's probably good for everyone else. And I think Florida State and Clemson will benefit the most in the short term. They're going to do better TV ratings over a 5-year span than North Carolina or Miami or any of these, Georgia Tech, any of these other teams. So it was worth it for Florida State and Clemson to spend the money to get the benefit. But at this point, I think you have to put aside all the other stuff and just say, man, if North Carolina can get out in 2026, like if they can announce before this deadline with the ACC, great. Because that means we're not far behind. Are we a year behind? Are we 2 years behind? Whatever. It doesn't matter. As soon as North Carolina can get out, better for everybody else kind of following suit.
Better for the Big 12. And I don't think North Carolina is a Big 12 brand, but I do believe, again, if you're looking at Virginia Tech or Pitt or Louisville, who likely aren't going to those Power 2, the Big 12's right there to catch them, and it only is going to make this conference better.
West Virginia, how specific is their interest here? How much does their interest matter when it comes to realignment? You think about some of those regional rivalries that are close to them, Pitt, Virginia Tech. Shoot, I know it's not like a huge rivalry that I've ever remembered, but I mean, even go back to the Big East, Louisville and West Virginia was really big. I think that one would be a ton of fun to get back into it as a Big East homer back in the day. I know they don't probably make a lot of sense. I'd love for USF to somehow get back in there because there were some really fun ones with West Virginia and USF and Louisville and Cincinnati even. But all that, and obviously UCF. Just thoughts on West Virginia and how their thoughts around this. Can they impact any of this in getting some of that back and around?
I think one day we're going to look back on the Wizard of Oz movie. Wizard of Oz? What is the Wizard of Oz movie? And when the college football version of it comes out, the realignment Wizard of Oz, and you pull the curtain back, what if Oz was just West Virginia the whole time? What if they were the great orchestrator of truly the downfall of the ACC? I think we forget the power West Virginia has as a brand in college football still. Even when they aren't as good on the playing field, they stick out to pretty much all of America because if there's one thing that state is driven on in sports, it's West Virginia football. I mentioned it a lot. I'm from Arkansas, grew up in a super small town. The only thing we had was football, sports. Arkansas Razorback Saturday mornings. And at West Virginia, it's the same thing in that you could not build a team of 22, 25, 30 football players who are competitive enough to compete just from that state alone. They've always had to work different, recruit outside of the state and go get great players from Florida, from Texas, from Ohio, from Pennsylvania, and make it work. They have so much, not just brand power, but savvy that goes overlooked consistently in the realm of college football. And now what's going to ignite that program to its full potential will be the resurgence of Pitt, West Virginia, Virginia Tech, West Virginia being in play here. Cincinnati, they've already got a Louisville, West Virginia matchup. And the reason it helps them maximize their full potential, they'll have these regional rivalries and they'll do it in a power conference. They'll do it with a major TV deal with the entire nation watching. That was a thing 20 years ago. West Virginia, they were on your TV when they played 15 years ago, LSU in Death Valley, and then hosted them in Morgantown. Those were massive matchups and gave the school a lot of pomp and circumstance. You haven't heard much in the last 10 years, but today, Ren Baker signing again. He's extending his contract as athletic director after passing up on the Oklahoma AD job to go back home to his roots. Him saying, I'm a Mountaineer man, shows me something big is going on at WVU. And I think what that is trying to help the Big 12 in gathering Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, these more regional schools. Because think about this, TJ. For years, this powerful brand like West Virginia that most people know and they represent an entire state and have maybe the most loyal fan base in all of college sports, they have not just been underrepresented, but they have been alone in the Big 12 Conference. You can't drive to really a single location in the Big 12. Oh, West Virginia, massive matchup with Oklahoma State, massive matchup with Texas or TCU or Houston. None of those made any sense. They were the outlier. Still an important, powerful brand, but how is your fan base as passionate and loyal as they are? How is your fan base able to really get up for West Virginia Baylor or West Virginia and Kansas State? It's just not something that's natural for them, not natural for the school. So I think the closer we get to the ACC falling apart, the more you see West Virginia being the school on the prowl that's trying to spearhead these conversations and grab regional matchups. Something hit me in a dream last night. I was like, what if it's West Virginia we've been overlooking all along as the school who's going to come out on top, maybe more than anyone else when the whole thing falls apart? And I've even heard that there is, if the SEC goes to 22 to 24, that short list probably has West Virginia on there. Another state, another tick, another brand that conference could add. They bring so much more to the table that I'm sure anyone really gives them credit for.
Yeah, they feel, and I don't want West Virginia fans to take this as a dig because I loved watching West Virginia. I hated their team because I was a USF guy living in Tampa. But I feel like West Virginia is almost so forgotten. You know, people forget really how great some of those teams were going back to the 2000s and prior, and even into the late 2000s. Yeah, 2010, early there too, and. They feel, because they don't feel, and this isn't a Big 10 shot or Big 12 shot, sorry. They just don't feel like they match up. Like you were mentioning the Baylors and the Kansas States, like they feel like a fish out of water, right? And I feel like maybe you could say the same for UCF, although it was such a big jump up for them to get to go to the Power Five, the Power Five at that point. That maybe it's a little different, but they just don't seem to fit that. If you could add in it's like sitting at a lunch table by yourself, right? If you could add in some of your buddies though, imagine going to, like you go to school, school's about to start back next week, thank the Lord, but you go to school and like all your friends are in the other class. And all your friends are like having fun on the playground and sitting around the lunch table together, and you don't get to do any of that. How much more do you thrive with all your buddies around you, right? Like, or all your enemies, I guess, because all those are rivalries. But I think we understand the thought of, man, how much more could West Virginia be with some of that regionality back into what made them great? And they're such a great fan base, right? I don't think anybody argues that. But hopefully with a hire, bringing Rich Rod back, hopefully with stability in the athletic department, that's a big deal. But man, just having some of those rivalries back, having things that, I mean, if you're a casual fan, how much do you really care to tune into West Virginia versus Baylor? Right? Like, how much do you really care? I
went to Baylor. I don't either.
Yeah, but if we could watch West Virginia Louisville right now, or West Virginia Virginia Tech, or West Virginia Pitt, all of those, I think the average fan would tune in. And then what does that do for their ratings? What does that do for their recruiting? What does that do for their status? What does that do for their fan base? Right? You're more jacked up about going to some of these games than you are about some of the other ones. So yeah, I mean, I think it'd be a massive win for West Virginia. Again, I mean, we're probably a couple of years off because we talked about, in a previous segment, we talked about UNC and Florida State and Clemson, and obviously those are going to be the first dominoes to fall. But when other dominoes start falling, what does the ramifications mean for each conference? Well, I'll tell you, I don't know about every single conference specifically, but when you look at West Virginia in specifics, I think it could be massive for them to get some of these teams in here.
Yeah, it's going to be huge for the Big 12, too, to stay alive. And I know that this conference is as strong as it's been without Texas and Oklahoma today, stronger than it has been since those two left and Bob Bowlesby was in charge. But then when you have Pitt and West Virginia, which is one of the great rivalries of college football, a very historic and blue-collar rivalry, or West Virginia and Louisville bringing back an old rivalry, or even having USF. So, and that's a whole Pandora's box, but having USF down the line as one of those brands that the Big 10, the Big 12 jockey over and try to grab when everything really starts to clump together and we have college football Pangea. You're going to bring back some of what we love about college football. And from there, Brett Yormark can really start to specialize this conference and say, hey, if you're Baylor, let's build a schedule where every year you play Houston, TCU, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. If you're West Virginia, every year you play Cincinnati, Louisville, Pitt, Virginia Tech. The protected rivalries get to be deeper and stronger to the point where now West Virginia doesn't have to play Arizona. West Virginia doesn't have to play Utah or Kansas State if they don't really want to. You have the opportunity to create a league where you get back what we loved about college football, and that was regionality. The Big Ten is a couple of teams away from doing the exact same thing. If we only have 3 conferences, TJ, I loved this tweet that you put out. It's like the stupidest thing that anyone has ever said is they love a conference. They root for a whole conference or root for a conference. We don't. The logo and keeping the teams together. No, what it's about is the matchups and who we get to pit together. At the end of the day, if tomorrow the Big 12 rebranded itself and called itself the All-State 20 and added 4 more schools, if it means that we get Louisville, West Virginia, if it means we get Baylor and Texas Tech year in and year out, some of the old classics in college football, well, then really all it was a merger of the Big 8 and the Southwest Conference. Once those come back, it doesn't matter what logo is on the conference. No one cares about wearing a hat that has the SEC or the Big, well, they do about the SEC, but the Big 10 or the Big 12 logo on it. All we care about is having what's quintessential in this sport, and those are the matchups that we grew up watching, the matchups we grew up caring about. That's why I think a move like this helps us get back to where we want to be in college football and the game that we love. It gives you year in and year out regional matchups you care about instead of, and this is where I thought the ACC really went wrong, Cal versus NC State or Stanford versus Virginia Tech. Those just don't make you a strong conference.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of the worst things that we've done to our sport with the realignment and the focus on the playoff and expanding everything else. We have lost the meaning of what made college football great, which was an incredible regular season that meant more than the postseason in most regards, and the regionality of rivalries, right? We are losing that. We are hopefully getting back to that. Hopefully if we do get to some kind of a super conference, or if it's 3 leagues or whatever, we can get back to, if everything goes to a super conference and we've got 50 teams in this super conference, then hopefully we can get back to some regionality that actually matters. And you don't have Cal versus Florida State as the dumbest match. Like, why are we doing this? Miami going up to Cal, like just too many, like what are we doing here? But we'll see. Drake, where can people follow you? Where can they find your work?
At Drake C. Toll on Twitter, or at LO Big 12 on the same platform. Then wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12.
Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
Always fun, TJ. Good.